The twin suns of Zirath Prime burned low in the horizon, painting the vast city of metal and smoke in shades of orange and crimson. It was evening, but the trade never stopped here. Merchants shouted in dozens of alien languages, lights flickered from ships docking and leaving, and the endless noise of barter echoed across the main plaza of the Grand Market, a place where anything could be bought, sold, or forgotten. Among the crowd walked a human. He wore a long brown coat faded by travel and time. His boots were scarred, his eyes hidden beneath the brim of a hood. His name was Commander Elias Voss, though few remembered him by rank anymore. Once he had fought for humanity during the frontier wars. Now he was just another wanderer drifting between stars, carrying memories heavier than any weapon. Elias had come to Zirath Prime for fuel and repairs, but as he passed the rows of cages made from glowing energy bars, something pulled at him. A whisper, a feeling he could not ignore. The slave market was louder than the rest of the bazaar. Traders stood behind shimmering cages, showing off their captives as if they were trophies. Some were criminals, some war prisoners, and some were simply born unlucky. Elias hated this place. He hated the way the crowd laughed when someone cried. He hated the smell of fear in the air. Humanity had once suffered under alien rule centuries ago. He knew too well what it meant to be powerless. He tried to look away. He almost succeeded, until he saw her. At the far end of the row, a larger cage stood apart. The light around it glowed bright blue, powered by containment energy strong enough to hold a battle tank. Inside sat a woman, or something close to one. Her skin shimmered faintly like pearl under the dim light, and her silver eyes reflected calm defiance even in defeat. Her long white hair was tangled, her royal robe torn and dirty, yet she still held herself like a queen on a throne of dust. A merchant shouted from behind the cage, "Come look. The Sarathi queen herself, last of her kind, captured after the fall of Serath IV, a true prize for anyone who dares to own her." The crowd gasped. Many stepped forward, whispering in disbelief. The Sarathi Dominion had once ruled dozens of worlds before they rebelled against the Galactic Union. The war had ended in flames, and this woman had been its symbol. Now she sat in chains, her head bowed, her name spat like a curse. Elias stopped walking. His heart pounded slowly as memories returned. Old war reports, soldiers burned alive, cities turned to glass. He remembered watching news of the Sarathi Queen's capture on a transmission years ago. The galaxy had celebrated her fall. But standing there, seeing her chained like an animal, Elias did not feel triumph. He felt shame. The merchant noticed him staring. "Ah, a human. You have good taste, my friend. The Queen may look quiet, but she's worth more than a fleet of ships. The Union allows her sail under special permission." "Care to bid?" Elias said nothing at first. His gaze remained locked on the prisoner. She lifted her head slowly, meeting his eyes. For a second, neither of them breathed. There was no hate in her look, only exhaustion and something deeper, something like silent sorrow. Elias finally spoke, his voice calm. "How much?" The merchant blinked, surprised. "You wish to buy her? You must be joking. Humans can't afford—" Elias pulled out a small data chip and held it up. "How much?" The merchant scanned the chip and nearly dropped his device. This is enough to buy a star yacht." "I'm not buying a ship," Elias said quietly. "I'm buying her," whispers spread through the crowd. Some laughed, others sneered. "A human buying a queen?" One alien muttered. "He'll regret that." The merchant hesitated, but greed won. Within minutes, the transaction was done. The energy field dropped with a soft hum. The queen didn't move. She didn't even look at Elias as the merchant handed him the control band, a small wrist device linked to her restraints. Elias stepped closer. "You're free," he said softly. The queen raised her eyes again, disbelief flickering for the first time. "Free?" Her voice was low, melodic, though rough from silence. "Humans do not buy slaves to free them. Maybe not all humans," Elias replied. "But I'm not here to own you." She stared at him as if trying to read his soul. Her silver eyes seemed to pierce through the dust and noise of the market. Then, without another word, she stood up, tall and graceful despite her weakness. The chains clinked lightly as she followed him out of the market. The crowd parted in silence. Some spat insults, others recorded the strange sight on their devices. A human walking beside the fallen queen of Serath. Elias ignored them all. Outside the bazaar, the noise faded into the hum of the spaceport. Ships rose and landed like shooting stars. Elias guided her to a small, worn freighter parked at the edge of the docking bay. The Resolute. Its paint was chipped, its hull patched from many battles, but it was alive, just like its captain. He opened the ramp and gestured. "Come aboard." The Queen hesitated. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly. "Do you expect gratitude, Alliance? Perhaps you think saving me will make your name shine across the stars?" Elias shook his head. "No, I don't want anything. You've been through enough." She narrowed her eyes. "Then what is your reason, human?" Elias paused before answering. "Because I remember what chains feel like." Something flickered across her face, shock, confusion, maybe even understanding. Without another word, she stepped onto the ship. Inside, the lights were dim, the air smelling faintly of oil and metal. Elias motioned toward a small cabin. "You can rest there. I'll get us off this planet before anyone changes their mind." As he walked toward the cockpit, he could feel her gaze following him. She didn't trust him, not yet. But she hadn't refused him either. That was enough for now. Minutes later, the Resolute lifted from the docking bay, engines roaring softly. The city below shrank into the distance, its lights fading beneath clouds of pollution and smoke. Elias exhaled slowly as stars filled the viewport. Behind him, the Queen appeared at the door of the cockpit. She stood without her chains now, holding them in her hands. "You could have kept these," she said. "They were worth more than your ship." "I don't want them," Elias said without looking back. "Throw them out the airlock if you like." She studied him quietly. "You are a strange human." "I get that a lot," he replied with a faint smile. She turned the metal cuffs over in her hands, watching how the dim light reflected on them. Then slowly she opened the small hatch beside the door and released them into the void. The chains drifted away, spinning silently into the stars until they vanished. Elias watched them go. For a long moment neither spoke. The hum of the engines filled the quiet between them. Finally she said, "My name is Thalara." "I know," Elias said softly. "And I'm Elias." Thalara's gaze softened. "Then Elias of Earth. What will you do now that you've bought the most hated queen in the galaxy?" He glanced at her reflection in the glass. "Get as far away from here as possible, and maybe help you remember what freedom feels like." Outside, the stars stretched into long lines as the Resolute jumped to light speed, leaving the world of chains behind. For the first time in years, Queen Thalara felt something stir deep within her chest. A small spark she thought had died long ago. Hope. The hum of the engines was the only sound aboard the Resolute. It had been 2 days since they left Zerath Prime behind. The stars outside stretched endlessly, glowing like distant fires across the black sea of space. Inside, the small freighter felt quiet, almost too quiet, like a place holding its breath. Elias Voss sat in the cockpit, staring at the navigation screen. His eyes were tired but alert. He had changed their route twice already, erasing their trail. Slavers and bounty hunters would not give up easily, not when someone had taken their most prized captive. Behind him, footsteps echoed softly. The door slid open and Queen Thalara entered. She no longer wore her torn royal robe. Instead, she had wrapped herself in a simple gray blanket he had given her. Her long white hair was tied loosely, and though her face was calm, her eyes still carried the shadow of captivity. "You haven't slept," she said quietly. Elias didn't turn. "Neither have you." Thalara walked to the viewport and stared into the stars. "I do not remember what peace looks like anymore. Every time I close my eyes, I see fire. The day my palace fell. The day my people screamed my name in fear." Elias looked at her reflection in the glass. "You don't have to remember that part." "Then what should I remember, human?" she asked bitterly. "That my armies burned worlds? That I was captured while others died for me? That I sit here now because one of my enemies decided to buy my chains?" Elias leaned back in his chair. "You think I'm your enemy?" Thalara turned toward him. Her silver eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. "You are human. The Galactic Union is human-led. The Union destroyed my world. Do you deny it?" He shook his head. "No, but not all humans are the Union. I fought under their banner once until I saw what they really were." She tilted her head slightly. "You deserted?" "I left," he corrected softly. "When I realized freedom meant nothing to them. They replaced one kind of rule with another, only cleaner, quieter, easier to hide. Talara watched him in silence for a while. She had heard many lies in her life, but there was none in his voice. Only weariness. Only truth. Then why save me? She finally asked. Why risk your life for someone like me? Elias looked out the window again. Because I saw what they did to you. And I remembered what they once did to us, she frowned. Us, humanity, he said. Before we became part of the Union, we were a colony species, used for labor, for war, for profit. We rose up, broke our chains, and made them see us as equals. But now, his voice trailed off, now we do the same to others. Maybe I just wanted to prove we're not beyond saving. Talara said nothing. She stood quietly beside him, the low hum of the ship filling the space between them. For the first time since her capture, she didn't feel like a prisoner. She felt something strange. Respect. Elias rose from his seat and walked to the small galley. You should eat something, he said. You've barely touched the food I left. I have little trust in human meals, she replied dryly. He smiled faintly. Fair enough. I'll make something less offensive. A few minutes later, the smell of warm stew filled the cabin. Elias set 2 bowls on the table. Talara hesitated but finally sat down across from him. The food was simple, protein paste and dried herbs rehydrated in broth. But it was warm, and the warmth spread through her cold hands. You could have sold me back, she said after a while. Earned more credits than you'll ever see in your life. Elias stirred his food. Credits don't mean much to me anymore. Then what does? She asked. He looked up at her. Doing the right thing. Her lips curved in a faint, almost invisible smile. A noble human. I thought your kind had forgotten that word. Elias chuckled softly. Some of us still remember. They ate in silence for a while. Outside, the stars drifted slowly past the window like falling snow. Talara found herself watching Elias instead of her meal. His movements were steady, disciplined, yet gentle. There was something strange about him, not weakness, but quiet strength. The kind that didn't need to shout to be heard. When they finished, Elias stood. You should rest. There's a cabin next to the engine room. It's not a palace, but it's safe. She nodded but didn't move. Her gaze lingered on him. Elias, she said softly, you are aware that freeing me makes you a criminal in the Union's eyes? I've been worse things, he replied. Criminal's not so bad. Then you truly have no plan? She asked, almost curious. I'll think of one tomorrow, he said. Tonight we survive. Talara watched him walk away and felt something she had not felt in years. Uncertainty mixed with admiration. She did not trust him completely, but part of her wanted to. She whispered to herself, strange human. Later that night, the ship drifted silently through a calm sector of space. The lights were dimmed. Talara lay in her cabin, unable to sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard echoes of the past. The roar of ships burning, the cries of her people, the cold laughter of her captors. Her breathing grew shallow. Her chest tightened. For a moment she felt as if she were still trapped in the cage. Then suddenly a gentle knock came at her door. Talara, you all right? Elias's voice carried through softly. She hesitated. I am fine, she lied. You don't sound fine. There was silence, then she said quietly, I have not slept without chains for a long time. Elias opened the door just enough to see her sitting upright, her blanket wrapped tightly around her. He didn't step inside. He simply leaned against the doorframe. You're safe here. I give you my word. She looked at him, her eyes shining faintly in the dark. Words mean little in a galaxy ruled by lies. Maybe, Elias said, but mine still means something. For a long moment, they held each other's gaze. Finally, she nodded slightly. You are either the bravest fool I have ever met, or the only honest man left among the stars. Elias smiled gently. I'll take that as a compliment. He turned to leave, but before he could, she said, Elias. He stopped. Thank you, she said softly, for not looking at me like they did. For seeing me as more than a trophy. He gave a small nod. Good night, Talara. When he left, she lay back and stared at the ceiling. The engines hummed steadily like a heartbeat. For the first time in years, she fell asleep without fear. Hours later, alarms screamed. Elias jumped from his seat in the cockpit as warning lights flashed red across the console. No, not now. A ship had appeared on the scanners, and fast armed and closing in. He recognized the signature immediately. Union bounty vessel. He slammed the intercom. "Thalara, wake up! We've got company!" Within seconds, she appeared beside him, fully alert. "How did they find us?" "Probably tracking code from the market," Elias said. "They're hailing us." "Don't answer," she said sharply. "They'll trace the signal." "Too late," Elias muttered. "They already know who we are." The communication screen flickered to life, showing the cold face of a Union officer. "This is Captain Varen of the Galactic Enforcement Fleet. You are harboring a war criminal. Surrender the fugitive immediately and your death will be quick." Elias gritted his teeth. "I don't take orders from tyrants," the officer sneered. "You'll regret that, human." The transmission ended. Moments later, the enemy ship fired. The Resolute shook violently as plasma bolts struck its shields. Sparks rained across the cockpit. Elias grabbed the controls. "Hold on!" Thalara gripped the chair. "You can't outrun a Union ship." "Maybe not," Elias said, "but I can outthink one." He dove the ship toward a nearby asteroid belt. The small freighter weaved between giant spinning rocks as explosions flashed behind them. The Union ship followed, firing constantly, missing by inches. Thalara closed her eyes and reached out with her mind, the power she had sworn never to use again. She felt the field of energy around the asteroids, the pull of gravity, the motion of metal and stone, and with one deep breath, she whispered words in her native tongue. Several large asteroids suddenly shifted their course, colliding in front of the pursuing vessel. The Union ship was forced to pull back, shields flaring under impact. Elias stared at her in shock. "Did you just—" "Later," she said firmly. "Fly." He obeyed, pushing the ship through the final stretch. When they finally cleared the asteroid belt, the radar showed the enemy falling behind. Elias exhaled in relief. "Remind me never to doubt you again," Thalara smiled faintly. "Now you know why they feared me." Elias nodded. "And why they'll never stop hunting us." She looked out at the stars, her expression calm but resolute. "Then let them come. I would rather die free than live in chains." Elias met her gaze and smiled. "That makes two of us." Outside, the stars shimmered brighter, the ship gliding through the dark, two fugitives bound by freedom, defiance, and something unspoken growing between them. The stars outside the viewport were calm again, but inside the Resolute, silence felt heavier than before. The recent battle had left the ship scarred, scorched panels, flickering lights, and a few warning signals blinking red on the console. But they were alive. For now. Elias Voss sat at the controls, his hands steady even though his body ached. He glanced at the display. Their shields were down to 30% and the fuel levels were falling fast. They couldn't run forever. Behind him, Queen Thalara stood near the window, watching the stars drift by. Her face was calm, but her eyes burned with quiet determination. The faint glow of the starlight reflected in her silver eyes like a hidden fire. Elias finally broke the silence. "You saved us back there." Thalara turned slightly. "I only moved a few rocks." "You moved half an asteroid field," he said with a small grin. "That's more than a few rocks." She didn't smile, but her tone softened. "I had promised myself never to use my power again." "What changed your mind?" he asked. She looked at him for a moment before answering. "You. You risked everything for me even when you had nothing to gain. I could not let that end in failure." Elias leaned back in his chair. "Then we're even." "No," Thalara said quietly. "You freed me. I only repaid a debt," he chuckled. "Let's call it even anyway." Her lips twitched slightly, the smallest trace of amusement. "You humans have strange ways of balance." "Maybe," Elias said, turning back to the screen. "But it keeps us alive." Hours passed as the ship drifted silently through empty space. The damage was too heavy for faster travel. They needed repairs, fuel, and a safe place to hide. Elias scrolled through the star map until he found one. "There," he said, pointing at a blinking blue icon. "A mining station on the edge of the Mara Belt. Abandoned for years, but still has docking systems and power. We can rest there." Thalara studied the screen. "You trust a dead station?" "I trust old places," he said simply. "Dead things don't talk." She raised an eyebrow. "You sound like a philosopher." "Just a tired pilot," he replied. 3 hours later, the Resolute dropped out of faster-than-light travel and approached the station. The Mara Belt spread before them. a sea of floating rocks glowing with traces of mineral light. At its heart floated a massive structure, black metal towers, broken antennas, and quiet corridors. The station's name, Orion 9, was barely visible on its rusted hull. Elias guided the ship toward the docking ring. The magnetic clamps locked in place with a deep metallic thud. Dust floated inside the airlock as they stepped out, their footsteps echoing through the empty halls. The place smelled of metal and cold air. Broken machinery lined the walls. Old screens flickered weakly, showing fragments of forgotten data. Talara's voice echoed softly. "This place feels like a tomb." "Then it's perfect," Elias said. "No one hunts ghosts." They moved through the corridors until they found a small control room. Elias powered it up, and lights slowly flickered to life. The screens displayed basic systems still active: oxygen flow, weak power supply, and environmental controls. Thalara brushed her fingers across a console. "Your technology is primitive, but efficient," Elias smiled faintly. "Primitive, built to last. Fancy things break too easily." She gave him a curious look. "You speak like a soldier." "Old habits," he said quietly. They worked together to repair the ship. Thalara's knowledge of energy systems surprised Elias. Though she had been a queen, she clearly knew more than politics and power. Her hands moved with precision, reconnecting circuits and stabilizing power cells. "You've done this before," Elias said, watching her. She glanced at him. "I led a war, Elias. Every queen who commands soldiers must learn to fix what breaks." He smiled. "Guess royalty means something different on your world." Her eyes softened. "It did. Once." There was a brief silence, a not uncomfortable but heavy with memory. Elias wanted to ask about her past but stopped himself. She would speak when ready. Later, as the repairs continued, Thalara sat near a window overlooking the asteroid field. The soft glow of minerals lit her face. Elias joined her, carrying 2 cups of heated water. She accepted hers with a quiet nod. "Thank you." Elias sat beside her, sipping slowly. "What was Saratha 4 like? Before the war?" Her eyes drifted to the stars. It was beautiful. Oceans of silver dust, forests that glowed under the twin moons. My people sang to the wind. Our cities floated among the clouds. We believed we were untouchable. She paused, her voice softer now. Then came the Union. They offered peace, and took our world instead. Elias looked down. "I've seen their peace. It usually comes with chains." Thalara turned to him. "Why did you leave them?" "You were part of their army, yes?" "I followed orders," he said quietly. "Until one day I couldn't anymore." "What happened?" Elias's jaw tightened. He looked away. "We were ordered to clear a colony that refused to join the Union. Non-combatants, families. They said it was to maintain order. I saw too much that day." He exhaled slowly. "I walked away and never went back." Thalara studied him in silence. "Then you are not like them." "Maybe," he said, "but I carry their shadow." She reached out gently and touched his arm. A simple gesture, but filled with meaning. "You carry more light than shadow, Elias." He looked at her hand, surprised. She withdrew it quickly. "Forgive me. It is not the Sarathi way to speak so freely." "It's fine," Elias said softly. "I think the galaxy could use a little honesty." They shared a quiet smile, fragile but real. Suddenly, a sharp beeping broke the calm. The station's old sensors flashed red. Elias rushed to the console. "No, no, no." "What is it?" Thalara asked, standing beside him. "Something's coming," he said, typing fast. "Union ships, 3 of them. They must have tracked our jump signature." "How long until they arrive?" 10 minutes. Thalara's voice hardened. "Then we fight." Elias looked at her. "Fight in this wreck? Against 3 warships?" She met his gaze without hesitation. "We do not run forever. You gave me freedom. Now let me defend it." He stared at her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right. Let's make them regret finding us." They moved quickly. Elias powered up the Resolute's defense systems, while Thalara linked her energy sense to the station's generators. Old weapons came online, glowing weakly with blue light. The entire outpost began to hum like an awakening beast. As the enemy ships entered the belt, Thalara stood near the observation window, eyes closed. Her voice was calm. "They are scanning, searching." Elias's hands tightened on the control sticks. "Let's give them something to find." The first Union ship approached, sleek and powerful. Its scanners locked onto the outpost. Fire, Elias muttered. The station's turrets roared to life, launching bolts of plasma that lit up the void. The Union ship fired back, shaking the outpost violently. Metal screamed as explosions echoed through the corridors. Thalara focused her energy, reinforcing the shields with invisible waves of power. The light around her shimmered faintly, her eyes glowing brighter than before. Elias shouted over the noise. "You're burning yourself out." "I can handle it," she called back. "Keep firing!" Another explosion hit the outer ring. The lights flickered, alarms blared. The station's power dropped to 20%. Elias gritted his teeth. "We can't hold much longer." Thalara opened her eyes, breathing hard. "Then it's time to leave." Elias hesitated. "Leave? The ship's still damaged. I'll buy us time," she said firmly. "Go!" He started to protest, but one look at her face silenced him. Determination burned there, unshakable, royal, and fierce. He ran to the ship, starting the engines. The Resolute roared to life, shaking off the dust. Thalara remained behind for a moment, her hands on the energy core of the station. With a whisper in her language, she released all remaining power in one final surge. A blinding wave of energy burst from the outpost, striking the nearest Union ship and sending it spinning into the belt. The others scattered. Elias yelled through the comm, "Thalara, get back here!" She sprinted through the collapsing corridors, debris falling around her. The ramp opened just as she leapt aboard. Elias pulled her inside and hit the thrusters. The Resolute shot out of the belt, engines blazing. Behind them, the station exploded in a brilliant flash, lighting up the stars like a second sun. Inside the cockpit, Thalara slumped into a seat, exhausted but alive. Elias looked at her, both worried and impressed. "You're insane," he said. She gave a weak smile. "So are you, human." They both laughed quietly, the tension slowly fading. Outside, the stars glowed once more, peaceful after the storm. Elias looked at her. "They won't stop, you know." "I know," she said softly. "But neither will we." He nodded. "Then we keep running, until we find a place worth fighting for." She smiled faintly. "Maybe we already have." The galaxy's edge shimmered outside the ship's window, the light of distant stars glowing across the void. Inside the Resolute, the air was quiet but heavy with tension. Queen Thalara stood near the viewport, her eyes fixed on the blue-green planet ahead, Sarath IV, her homeworld. She had not seen it in years. Once its skies had been filled with her banners. Now it belonged to the Galactic Union, guarded by fleets that watched every world they protected. Her home had become a symbol of obedience. The queen who once ruled it had become a forgotten prisoner, sold and shamed. But not anymore. Elias Voss, the human who had freed her, stood behind her, checking the navigation systems. His face was calm, but the lines around his eyes showed how much the journey had cost him. They had escaped bounty hunters, crossed war zones, and risked everything to come here. Thalara turned to him. "You understand what you're walking into?" she asked softly. Elias gave a faint smile. "I've been walking into trouble since the day I joined the fleet. This isn't new." She almost smiled in return, but stopped herself. "If they capture us, they'll kill you. They'll call you a traitor to the Union." He looked at her with the same steady calm he had shown since the day he bought her chains. "Then let's make sure they don't capture us." The ship entered the planet's upper atmosphere, cutting through layers of gray clouds. The once vibrant cities of the Sarathi were now silent, their towers stripped of color. Union patrols moved through the skies, their ships painted in silver and blue, the color of control. Elias guided the ship toward the deep jungle on the southern continent, near the ruins of the old citadel, where Thalara had once ruled. It was a place forgotten by most, destroyed during the war. Now it was their best hiding spot. The moment they landed, Thalara stepped onto the ground, her boots sinking slightly into the moss. The air was heavy, warm, and filled with the sound of strange creatures. The smell of her world, a mix of rain and soil, hit her, and she felt her heart tighten. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Home." Elias came down behind her, carrying a scanner. "We need to move fast," he said. "Union patrols will detect us soon." Thalara nodded. "There's an underground passage that leads to the old halls. If the sensors still work, we can send a signal from there." Together they moved through the ruins. Vines covered broken walls, and the carved symbols of her people were half buried under dirt. Every step Thalara took felt like a memory, her coronation, her speeches, her fall. In one collapsed corridor, she paused, brushing her fingers over an old flag that still hung, torn and faded. "I promised my people freedom," she murmured. "And I failed them." Elias looked at her. "You didn't fail. You were betrayed. Now you have a second chance." Her golden eyes met his, and for the first time she allowed herself to believe him. They reached the communications chamber, hidden beneath layers of stone. The machines were old but still hummed faintly with power. Elias began working on the console, connecting wires and rerouting circuits. Sparks flew as he rewired the system, sweat forming on his brow. Thalara stood nearby, adjusting her ceremonial crest, the last piece of her past she had kept. She knew what she had to do, tell her people the truth. "Are you sure it will work?" she asked. Elias nodded. "It'll reach every Scifi channel still active. And if the Union tries to stop it, they'll be too late." He stepped back and looked at her. "It's your voice they need to hear, not mine." Thalara took a deep breath and stepped toward the console. The machine's lens glowed blue as it began recording. Her reflection appeared, tired, scarred, but regal. She spoke. "My people," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "If you hear this, then know that your queen still lives." Across the planet, old networks came alive. Screens in homes and marketplaces flickered to life, showing the face they had thought gone forever. "I was captured, betrayed by those who claimed to bring peace." Thalara continued. "They said I was a tyrant. They said I enslaved others. But they were the ones who chained us, who took our pride and called it protection." Elias watched silently as her voice grew stronger. "For years, I was silent. But a stranger, a human, showed me that silence is death. He showed me that freedom is not given. It is taken by those who dare to fight for it. So I call upon every Scifi who still remembers our name. Rise again. Not for me, for us. For the right to stand as equals once more." Her hand trembled as she ended the transmission. The console beeped softly, confirming the signal had spread across the planet and beyond. "It's done," she said quietly. But Elias's scanner began to blink red. "We've got company." Outside engines roared in the sky. Union ships were approaching fast, drawn by the signal. Elias grabbed his blaster and checked the ship's status. Thalara turned to him. "You should go. They're coming for me, not you." "Not a chance," Elias said, shaking his head. "We started this together." The ground shook as the first blast hit nearby. Dust filled the air. They ran through the ruins, dodging falling debris. The jungle burned where plasma fire struck the trees. Elias led her toward the Resolute, firing at drones that swooped down from the clouds. Thalara used her telepathic powers to disrupt their targeting systems, her eyes glowing faintly. The two fought side by side, human and alien, bound by purpose. When they reached the clearing, a large shadow fell over them, a Union battleship descending. Thalara's voice was calm. "If they destroy us, my people will still know. The message is already out." Elias looked at her, determination burning in his eyes. "Then let's make sure they see we're not backing down." He sprinted toward the ship's turret, firing at the incoming fighters. Explosions lit the air. Thalara stood near the ramp, using her mental energy to shield them as debris rained from the sky. Through the chaos, a voice echoed from the ship's comm, a familiar one. "Thalara, this is General Kareth of the Scifi Guard. We received your signal. We are coming." The skies above shifted. Small ships, once hidden in deep caves and mountains, began to rise. The old Scifi fleet reborn. They surrounded the Union ships, attacking with precision. The air filled with light as the first battle for freedom began. Elias and Thalara watched as the Union fleet pulled back, unprepared for the sudden uprising. When the sky cleared, the jungle was scorched, but the planet still stood. Hours later, they stood on a cliff overlooking the horizon. Fires burned in the distance, but there was hope in the air, real hope. Thalara looked at Elias. "You didn't have to do this. You could have walked away." Elias smiled faintly. "Humans don't walk away when someone needs help. That's what makes us human." She looked at him, a quiet respect in her eyes. "Then maybe that's what makes you special." The sun rose slowly over Sarath 4, lighting the sky in gold. Thalara turned her face toward the light. Her people were rising again. Her chains were gone. And somewhere deep inside she knew that her freedom, and her world's future, began the day a human chose compassion over power. The horizon of Serath 4 glowed gold as the first sun rose over a recovering world. Fires still burned in the distance and the air smelled of smoke and rain. Yet the planet was alive. Alive with hope, resistance, and the promise of freedom. Queen Thalara stood atop the cliffs overlooking her home. Her hair shone white in the sunlight, her silver eyes calm but determined. She had faced defeat, betrayal, and captivity. But now the people of Serath 4 had risen. The small fleet she had called upon, once hidden, now challenged the remaining Union patrols. Behind her, the soft hum of a ship's engine signaled the presence of Elias Voss. He had stayed by her side since the day he freed her, refusing to leave, refusing to let her fight alone. His human persistence, his unwavering courage had become her anchor, a reminder that freedom was not a gift, but a choice, defended with action. Thalara turned to him. "You should not have stayed," she said softly. "You risk everything for a queen who is already cursed by history." Elias shrugged, his eyes scanning the skies for threats. "Cursed, maybe, but if I don't help, then who else will? Besides," his gaze met hers, "you needed someone to see the real you, not the chains, not the propaganda." She studied him in silence, and for the first time, she allowed herself to drop the walls built by years of betrayal. "You are not like any human I have known," she admitted. He smiled faintly. "And you're not like any alien I've ever met. I guess that makes us a team." Before she could respond, an alarm from the Resolute blared. A small Union squadron had detected the planet-wide transmission she had sent. They were closing in fast. Elias's jaw tightened. "We don't have time. I have to make a move, a final one." "What do you mean?" Thalara asked, sensing the resolve in his tone. He gestured to a reinforced compartment aboard the ship. "There's a data core, proof of Union corruption, enslavement, and illegal operations across the galaxy. I'll transmit it to every major system. The galaxy will see the truth, but the moment I do, they'll come for me." She shook her head. "I cannot allow that." "You cannot stop me," Elias said calmly. "You freed me from chains once. Now I'm returning the favor. You gave your people hope. Let me give them a future." Thalara's silver eyes softened. She understood the sacrifice he was ready to make. "Then we do this together," she said. They boarded the Resolute. The ship's engines hummed steadily as Elias prepared the transmission. Outside, the Union patrols had gathered in formation, scanning for any signs of life. The small freighter looked fragile against the massive warships, yet Elias navigated it with the precision of a master pilot. Thalara moved to his side. "It's ready?" He nodded. "Once I hit send, there's no turning back." Her hand rested briefly on his arm. "Then may your courage be as strong as your heart." With a deep breath, Elias activated the data core. Streams of information, videos, communications, and evidence flooded the galaxy's networks. Union officers watched in horror as years of lies and crimes were exposed. Every world, every system received the proof. Chains, forced labor, destroyed colonies, all connected to the Union's leaders. The transmission shook the galaxy. Across the stars, whispers of rebellion ignited. Systems that had remained silent, fearful of punishment, began preparing fleets, sending messages and forming alliances. Elias glanced at Thalara. "It's out. Now we hold on." The Union fleet moved to intercept, firing at the Resolute with full power. The ship rocked under the barrage of plasma blasts, alarms flashing violently. Elias swerved, dodging explosions while Thalara focused, shielding the ship with a faint glow of her telepathic energy. "Elias!" she shouted. "The shields won't last." "I know," he yelled back. "We just need a few minutes." The battles above Serath 4 were chaotic. Rebel fleets, inspired by Thalara's message, attacked the Union patrols. The once mighty enforcers of oppression were overwhelmed by the combined courage of those who had been silenced too long. Inside the cockpit, Elias's face was tense, his hands steady as he guided the ship through debris and enemy fire. Thalara reached out with her mind, coordinating with rebel ships, disabling enemy targeting systems, and protecting civilians in orbiting stations. Together, human ingenuity and alien power turned the tide. Finally, after what felt like hours, the last Union ship retreated, leaving Serathfi's skies clear. The rebels cheered across the planet and in the fleets above, Elias exhaled deeply, slumping into his seat. Talara placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've done it," she said softly. "The galaxy has heard the truth." He smiled faintly, tired but triumphant. "And your people are free." "Thanks to you, Talara." She shook her head. "Thanks to both of us. You saw me not as a queen, not as a symbol, but as someone worth saving. That changed everything." Days later, Sarath IV began to rebuild. Villages, cities, and forests once scorched by war now showed signs of life. Talara walked among her people, no longer a figure of fear or a prisoner, but a true queen reborn. Elias remained by her side, though he no longer wore a uniform. His long coat was faded, his boots dusty from travel, but his presence brought a sense of security. Wherever she went, he followed, not as a soldier, but as a friend and protector. The people watched them with awe. A human had freed their queen. A queen had embraced the help of a human. Together, they had changed the fate of the galaxy. Talara addressed the people from the restored balcony of the old citadel. "Our chains are gone, and not just the physical ones," she said. "We are free to think, free to rise, and free to live. But remember this, freedom is never given. It is defended. And sometimes it comes from the most unexpected places." The crowd erupted in cheers. Their voices, once silenced, now echoed across mountains and valleys. Later, as the sun set over the horizon, Talara and Elias stood together, watching the golden light reflect off the new cities. "You know," she said softly, "history will remember this day as the day Sarath IV rose again. And they will remember a human who refused to let chains define a queen." Elias replied. She turned to him, her eyes shining. "You are not like the others, you are extraordinary." He chuckled faintly. "I just did what anyone would do. Save someone who deserves it." "No," she said firmly. "Not anyone. You chose courage over comfort. You chose compassion over indifference. That is why you are extraordinary." Elias looked at her and smiled. For the first time, he allowed himself to feel proud, not of battles won or ranks earned, but of a simple human act, saving a life. Talara extended her hand. "Come, human. Let us walk among our people. Together." He took her hand, and together they descended the steps into the streets of a world reborn. Children ran past them laughing. Adults waved and cheered. Life, once fragile, was growing stronger every moment. Months passed. Sarath IV became a symbol of hope across the galaxy. Other planets, inspired by the story of a human and a freed queen, began questioning the Union's rule. Revolts and uprisings grew not from anger alone, but from belief in justice, freedom, and unity. Talara rebuilt her throne, not as a ruler who demanded obedience, but as a leader who listened, guided, and protected. And always Elias stood by her side, the human who had refused to let chains define a queen, and whose courage reminded everyone that even one person could make the galaxy see the truth. A monument was built in the capital. It depicted a human holding broken chains facing a rising sun. Beneath it, the inscription read, "He bought her freedom, but gave the galaxy its soul." Talara stood before the monument, silent, remembering every step of her journey, the fall, the captivity, the human who believed in her, and the world they had saved together. Elias beside her smiled faintly. "Not bad for a day's work," he said. She laughed softly, her voice carrying across the square. "Not bad at all, Elias, not bad at all." As the sun set behind them, the queen and the human walked forward together, hand in hand. The galaxy was vast, but now, at least one corner of it knew the power of courage, compassion, and the unbreakable spirit of freedom. And for the first time in a long time, Queen Talara truly felt free. The end.